So this is interview skills and techniques for interns, but it actually applies to anybody who's going for an interview as a nurse or a midwife. So I have included quite a lot of information in the slide set. Some of it we will go through in more detail than others, but use it as a resource just to point you in the right direction. So I'm going to be looking at curriculum vitae, the interview process. I'm going to say something about knowing your profession and the context and knowing key issues. Now, what I want to say, and I will repeat this at a number of points during the session, is that there's no expectation you'll have any necessarily detailed knowledge on most of the information. It's just having an awareness more than anything. So don't feel you need to go off and be an expert on anything that I'm sort of mentioning in those areas, professional context or issues. And then we'll finish it off with competency-based interviews, the specific issues in relationship to that. But just also to say about the fact that it's at the end, all of the information that comes before enables you to perform at the interview. So there is a connection with all of the information. So what I want you to do first of all is just to let me know what your expectations are. What are the things that you want to know about, or what are the things you're concerned about? So I'd like you to go onto your phone or on your laptop or even onto a tablet that you might have. Go to menti.com, put in the password 75 16 54 and 9, and then you could just put up one or two words just to outline what it is you're particularly interested in, and we'll see them come up on the screen. So I'll just give you a minute or two just to do that. Catherine, can you see the screen? What are your expectations?
Yes, I can.
Okay. As soon as you start typing information in, it should appear. Now, sorry, just ignore the code at the top because that's an old code. So the code is, if you forgot it, 75 16 54 and 9. Or you can go into the chat and you can see there's a direct link.
Steve?
Yes?
Just to let you know, it's actually the old code that worked, the new code didn't for me.
Oh, right, okay. And I've just changed it. Okay. Do you want to go for that then? 72 16 54 9. Okay, just some common questions that might be asked. Yes, learning confidence. Yeah, the confidence ultimately is in the preparation. What is expected of you in the interview? Common questions, common interview questions for nurses. Yeah, job application. Yeah, competency-based questions. I want to do the best interview in order to get my preferred ward. Yeah, questions may be asked. Building your confidence going in. Yeah, it is a nerve-wracking process for most people, but if you prepare, it can sort of limit that anxiety. Common question seems to be a key one. Confidence, baseline standard expectations, techniques to work on your interview. Yes, absolutely. Common questions for nurses, questions you might have to answer, what's required, learning, confidence, reducing anxiety, confidence going into interviews. Okay, so there's a whole range of different issues around the questions and also easing anxiety and confidence. They seem to be common. Okay, and they're no different probably to anybody going for an interview, regardless of whatever level the individual might be in. Tips on presenting my CV. Okay, common questions for mental health. I think the questions are generally common anyway. How to fill out a job application. Okay, so there's a whole range of different things there around questions, confidence. Let's just go back to the slides. Okay, can you see my screen again, Catherine?
We can, yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, so the first thing in the process is always preparing the CV. And what I would say about the CV is that when you actually look at all of the ways of actually selecting the appropriate person for a job, the worst method of, or the worst process in terms of the process you use for selecting is by looking at somebody's CV. That doesn't necessarily give you a good indication of the individual. So its importance is relatively low in terms of the whole process of selecting individuals. And the next worst method of selecting people is by interview. It's improved by using a competency-based interview, but the best method, which is never used in healthcare, is using an assessment centre where you put in a CV, you do a number of interviews, and you also demonstrate your skills as well. So that's probably the gold standard in terms of selecting individuals. And the reason I say that is that you need to put some effort into your CV, but it's not the be-all and end-all. The important thing about the CV is that it contains the information that is required in the job advert and the job description. So if you're required to demonstrate you're a nurse, they want you to put in about continual professional development, then you have to put that information in, and so on. So if they want evidence of, in a different type of job, it might be teaching experience, when you need to put that type of information in. So just make sure that you have the information that is required. And the standard information in a CV is usually education, it's usually a job experience, and continual professional development. And that's probably all that you need to put in. I'll say a bit more about that just in a moment. So the important thing, as I've mentioned, is does it contain the right information? And you'll know that because it's on the job description or it's on the job advert, and it'll tell you exactly what the requirements are. Is it concise and to the point? So try to avoid putting too much information in there. Does it flow logically? So it needs to be clear, and it needs to have the right heading so people can quickly find the information they're looking for. Remember, they may have a number of CVs they're looking at, so they want to be able to find the information to match up to make sure you're a suitable candidate to be interviewed. So just make it easy for the person who's looking for the information. Is it presentable? And I suppose what I mean by presentable, you don't need to necessarily go to any huge effort. You don't necessarily need to employ somebody to design your CV. There are templates on Microsoft Word. So if you just go into Google and say CV templates for Microsoft Word, they will actually appear, and you can just download them and then fill in the spaces. Just as long as it's presentable, just as long as it flows logically. Check for errors, so do a spell check on the CV, get somebody to look at the information as well, just to read through it, just to make sure there's no errors. And ultimately, you're just making sure that it's easy to search for the information that's required. So the information that should be in your CV, it should contain your contact information. It should have your name. It's often useful if you've got more than a couple of pages to put your name on each of the pages right at the top in the header. Put your address, your contact telephone number, and your email. Because you'll be applying for nurse and midwifery jobs, put in your NMBI PIN and also indicate when it expires as well. That will indicate one, you're a nurse, and secondly, that you're currently on the register. So put in your employment history. Your employment history can be, should just be your date, your job title, and then the organisation you've worked in. You can put in a few lines underneath it just to outline what your main function was within that particular job. Now, as a new graduate, it's likely that this will be limited in terms of the amount of experience you might have. But as a minimum, when you're working as a nurse, what you should be putting in there is that your part of your role is to carry out nursing care in the assessment, planning, implementation and evaluation of nursing care. That's at least a line you can put in. So remember, it's about the nursing process, the assessment, planning, implementation and evaluation of nursing or midwifery care. And then you can say what type of unit or clinical area. Your education history, that will include primarily at this point in time your nurse and midwifery education. from your university or HEI. You can, if you want, put in your leaving certificate as well, just for some additional information. As you progress in your career, that will drop out, and you probably won't need to be putting that in beyond once you've established yourself in terms of your career. But as it's your first CV, it might be worth putting in that information just because it includes additional information. Put in any continual professional development as well. So anything you've engaged in, and continual professional development, I suppose it's much more looser now in terms of what that actually means. So if you've conferences, you've attended any masterclasses, you've attended training, you've completed any online information, or even attended webinars, you can put that information in and list it in terms of the date. The good thing about that is that you could go on HSE land and capture that information, so complete a course on HSE land, or you could attend a webinar, or even attend a webinar retrospectively. So for example, if you go on the INMO website, INMO Professional, you'll find there's content from webinars that you can watch, and then you can put those down on your CV. Just be aware, I suppose, into the future that the expectation will be, once NMBI introduce the competency-based scheme in terms of validating your registration, is likely to be based around reflection, but that'll come down the road. And then any of information that's applicable. So if it's for a job that requires you to have specific skills in teaching or in a particular area, to have IT skills or any particular skill that they're looking for, then you can put that information as well. It's likely in your first job that won't be as relevant. You can put in referees if you'd like. What is now increasingly standard is that you can put a line that just says that referees are available on request when listing your referees out. And just remember that the referees should be aware that you have put their name down, just so they don't just receive an email or a contact and they're not ready for it. But just to buy yourself some time, you can put in there that they're available on request. So just as a general pointer, the length should be no more than 2 sides of A4. So do them on 2 different pages rather than back to back. As I've said, they should be clear, should flow logically, easy to read, presentable, neat, uncluttered, and should be professional. They should be tailored to the job, and this is an important component. You should have a standard CV, but you need to then tailor it to each job that you're applying for. So if you're applying for a job in a surgical area, then it might well be there's a leaning or emphasis towards your experience in terms of surgical nursing on the same for medical nursing. Just make sure that there's no spelling errors in there, because they do jump out. So get 2 other people just to proofread it for you. And just remember, when you're writing about yourself, particularly around your just outlining what your recent job was in, words in, emphasize that you were doing things, and it's not just something you've just copied and pasted. So you were doing this, and I did this, and I was a member, I led this, or I was involved in this particular area. Now, in terms of the cover letter, some people put a cover letter in with additional information. Usually, the people who are reviewing the applications, whether it's a CV or an application, tend not to read that information because it's outside of what they've asked for. So yes, put a cover letter in. The important thing about a cover letter is it's just being clear about what job you're applying for. But you don't need to necessarily write any additional information, because that's contained in your CV, and if it's required, they will ask you at the interview. So that comes from the RCN, that information. One of the areas that people often ask questions about is in terms of personal statements and summaries. This is essentially just a brief paragraph that goes at the beginning of your CV. It's sometimes, as I've just mentioned around the cover letter, sometimes people put the same information in a cover letter. It depends on your own preference. Traditionally, I haven't personally put in a personal statement. In the last job I applied for, I did put one in. It should be very short and 50 to 100 words maximum. It should be tailored specifically to the job you're applying for, and it should emphasize your personal qualities and strengths. It might mention a line just emphasizing the key aspect in terms of your career history and experience, and it demonstrates what you're passionate about. And again, you use words such as compassionate, caring, professional, hardworking, and so on. They're the type of words you'd put in a personal statement. So just to say, that's entirely up to you whether you want to put the personal statement in. It's not necessary in terms of putting on the CV, and definitely not really on the cover letter, because as I said, most people who are reviewing the documents won't really take that into account because it's additional information to what they have required, and just to be fair to everybody, they tend to look for the information that they've asked for. But if you are making a personal statement, these are sort of some of the sentences you could put in. That I'm a hard-working individual who gives 100% all the time, always sees all the tasks through to completion, confident and decisive, self-motivated and disciplined when working individually, and so on. So they're the type of sentences that you could add if you decide to use a personal statement. So I'm not going to say anything more about CVs because I think that the CV is something that you just need to make sure that it's neat and tidy and contains the required information, nothing more than that. So I wouldn't be putting a vast amount of effort into the CV, provided it is neat, tidy, flows logically, and contains the information that is required. So I'm just going to say something around the interview next, just to give you an idea in terms of what to expect from the interview. So the key thing about interviews is to remember that it's a method for selecting people through a conversation. So it is a conversation rather than an interrogation. So it's an interaction between 2 or more people. In an interview, it's likely you'll have between 3 and 5 individuals interviewing you. The more people that are in that interview, the less opportunity they will ask questions. So they tend to keep it to 3 or 4 people maximum. So that's what you should expect. I once went to an interview where there were about 10 people interviewing, which included all of the directors of nursing from the teaching hospitals, human resource directors, and so on. But it only lasted 45 minutes, and it was relatively straightforward because, as I said, there were so many of them there wanting to ask questions. None of them could do any follow-up questions or probe in any detail. So it is the principal method used for interviews. The employer's goal is to obtain information from you that is not provided in the CV, usually as part of the competency component. So they have a very defined purpose in terms of the CV. It's also your opportunity to showcase yourself, to show that you're the most suitable candidate for the job. So it's about selling your skills and abilities. So it's a two-way process. They're looking for the right candidate, and you're looking to see whether they're the right employer, and also to sell yourself as well. So it is a two-way process for you to evaluate them and them to evaluate you. So just to emphasize again, it's absolutely not an interrogation. If you find that it is an interrogation, then it just shows poor human resource practice, because that's not the purpose. The idea is to find the correct person for the post that's been advertised. So it involves 3 steps. There's the preparation, which is probably the most important. The interview. Now I've got presentation there. As you develop your career, you might be asked to present. I suspect in any of the jobs you'll be applying for, it'll just be the straightforward interview. And then there's the post-interview follow-up in terms of trying to understand what happened. I'll say something more about that in a while. So just to say that the key aspect is in terms of preparation. That will reduce your anxiety and increase your confidence as well. It won't take all of the anxiety away, but it will help you prepare. It's no different in terms of where you see patients who might be going in for surgery, and that we know that when we prepare them, they're going to experience less anxiety and less pain after the event as well. So it's the same in terms of interviews. The more preparation you do, the less anxious you'll feel, and hopefully the more chance of success you will have as well. Or at least after the interview, even if you're not successful, you'll be happy in the fact that you performed to your best ability, because there may well be somebody who's more suitable for the job, but at least you will think to yourself that you've prepared and you've performed well at the interview. So there's a number of steps in terms of the interview. Part of it is in terms of the preparation, about knowing yourself, but there's also knowing the role that you're applying for, and also being prepared for the actual specifics around the interview. So research yourself, look at your CV, know your CV in detail. Remember, anything you put on your CV, potentially they're going to ask a question about. So you need to be able to respond to every single element you put on the CV. And if you can't, take it out, because it just exposes in terms of something that you might not be confident in talking about. So be aware of yourselves, be prepared to answer questions, give examples. And what I would say, and I'll probably repeat this a number of times, around competency-based interviews, it's about providing a story and providing examples. So you can prepare those before you go into the interview. That is probably one of the key preparations, is to have your stories. Think about examples when you've been an intern that you can apply in terms of becoming a staff nurse. So you need to be able to provide and know your skills or strengths. A common question that you're asked is, what are your strengths? And that's in a little while. Also acknowledge your weakness. I suppose portray them in a positive way. So if you have a weakness, you need to be saying that it's an area where you've reflected upon, you've developed, and you've learned from. So the key thing around weaknesses or errors is always that it's a learning experience. Have some goals in terms of where you want to go in terms of your career. Do you see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years following a clinical pathway in a particular type of setting? Do you see yourself becoming a staff nurse for 2 or 3 years, then perhaps looking at a clinical nurse specialist role and moving into advanced nurse, becoming an advanced nurse practitioner over a 10-year period? Do you see yourself going through the management route, or even in terms of the education and academic route? They're the 3 key routes in terms of career development in nursing, and you can move across those routes as well. Remember to be honest. And the other aspect is to ask people to actually give you feedback in terms of how you present yourself. So that's sort of carrying out mock type interviews, or at least trying out some of the questions and talking about your examples that you're going to be using in the interview. So the role, so that's about yourself. What about the role? You need to be aware of what the role is you're applying for. So it's not just any old staff nurse post, it's in a specific area. And it's likely that somebody from the clinical area will be on the interview panel. So it will show interest if you know something about the role, the organisation, the unit, and so on. So you need to know about. So first of all, you need to look at the job description and be familiar with the job description. The importance of that as well is that in the job description, it should outline the specification or competency for the job. When the interview is being developed, the people who are interviewing you will be allocated one of those competencies or specifications. So beforehand, you should know what are going to be the domains or the areas they're going to ask you questions about, because it's in the job specifications or competencies. So that gives you an idea of where to find the information they're going to focus on. And the reason they will focus on those areas is because it has to be fair and systematic. It has to be reliable and repeatable as well. So each person that comes into the interview, they will ask them the same type of questions for fairness, and they won't deviate from the job description or the specifications or competencies unless you introduce something into the interview. So that gives you an idea of the type of things that they'll focus on. You can talk to previous job holders or people in similar roles as well. There's nothing wrong with approaching somebody just to ask them what the area is like. to work in. I've had people previously ringing me up to ask me about a job that's been that has been advertised. Provided you're not canvassing for the job, there's no issue with that, and provided the individual is willing to talk to anybody that has a query or would like to know about the job. Also, imagine yourself in the job. Can you see yourself walking into the clinical area, the ward or the community area, and getting the job? So that sort of visualizes that that you do see yourself in the job. So that gives you more inner confidence in terms of applying for the role. And just the interview itself, in terms of preparation, it's important that you find out how to get to the interview, whether there's parking available, where you need to park, what the public transport is, how long it takes, when it arrives. Be prepared to answer questions, anticipate the questions. And that goes back to the point which I'll keep on emphasising, which is you need to have the stories and you need to have the examples from your intern year. That's the most important aspect of competency-based interviews. Do a mock interview if possible with friends, just so you can actually talk through some of the questions, so you can actually hear yourself speaking the words, because that is important, because if it's all internalized, then it's almost a shock when you actually start speaking and giving the example. So at least verbalize them. Look for feedback in terms of your voice, your posture, and how you present yourself. Practice, practice, practice. That's an important. So those three elements give you the basis of an interview and preparing for an interview. Just some general information. So this applies in any job. Be aware that people often make decisions about individual, usually subconsciously, in terms of how they see you. So in terms of their first impressions. So be aware of the importance of eye contact, obviously not staring at people, but make sure that you look at the person who's asking you the question, and also scan around to involve everyone else in know something about the hospital. Apologies, my screen just went off then. Can you now see me, Catherine?
We can, yeah. It froze just at the start of that slide there when you were talking about eye contact.
Yeah, okay. So just to say that you should have some knowledge about the organisation, which hospital group is it in, or something about the history or its specialities. Again, they're not going to be questioned on that, but what you're demonstrating is that you have researched the organisation and know something about the job. Don't forget to smile. 40% of people don't smile in interviews, particularly if you're nervous. Be aware that it sort of demonstrates something about you. Even when we look at photographs, if the person is smiling as opposed to not smiling, then it's likely we have a much more positive view of that individual. And make sure that you sit upright. A third of people don't sit upright. Be aware if you fidget. Make sure you handshake, and it's not a limp handshake. It doesn't need to be one of those forceful handshakes that people are holding your hand too long for, but it needs to be firm, just to show your confidence. It does present a more confident person. Try not to be aware of sort of things such as playing with your hair, touching your face, and so on, or crossing your arms, because that looks defensive, as we know. And not too many hand gestures in terms of moving your hands about. Just also be aware in terms of the clothes you wear. Now, this is not to be directive in terms of clothes you wear, but there is an expectation you dress professionally and in a sort of somber way. Avoid any colours or checks or stripes and so on. Keep it relatively businesslike. And there's some other information you can find in terms of job interviews. So just to continue on in that, in terms of recap of things to do, dress appropriately, arrive 10 minutes early, treat everybody you're in contact with courtesy and respect. It's unlikely in the health service, but if you're in the private sector, they may be asked for their opinion about you in terms of when you came into the organisation. Offer the handshake, listen to make sure you understand the interviewer's name. and use the correct pronunciation. Things to do. Even when the interviewer gives you their first name, use their last name and their job title. Maintain good eye contact, just to re-emphasize that. Sit in your seat, respond to questions and any backup questions they might have. Ask for clarification. Just stop on that component there, because if you haven't heard the question or you want to bide yourself some time, there's nothing wrong with saying, would you mind repeating the question, or could you clarify the question because I'm not quite sure in terms of what you're asking. There's nothing wrong with that. That actually shows that you can actually, if there is an issue, you will stop and ask for more information. Use good grammar, good diction, say yes, not yeah, and so on. So that's a standard thing just to be aware of. Just some more interview don'ts. Don't make excuses. Take responsibility for any decisions or actions you've been involved in. If there are any issues, such as errors that are made or things that didn't go as well in your past, use it as a learning experience. This is what happened. When I reflected on it, this is what I learned, and this is what I will do differently in the future. That is actually a sign of strength. Don't say anything negative about anybody you've been previously employed by, supervisors, employers, or any sectors, lecturers or anything like that. So avoid any negative comments. Don't treat the interview as casual. It should be professional. Don't give the impression you're only interested in just getting any old job and you're interested in the salary. Don't act as though you would take the job out of desperation. There's also the element that you're also deciding whether the job is suitable for you. And then just the standard stuff, don't chew gum or smell of smoke. And just be aware in terms of your mobile phone, turn it off completely, or don't take the mobile phone into the interview. There's nothing worse than in the middle of the interview, your phone going off. So just be aware of that. They're just standard don'ts in terms of an interview. So just in summary, know and understand what the employer is looking for. Look at the CV, understand the organization. Everyone is nervous. It would be unnatural not to be nervous, but it's about trying to minimize your nerves by preparation. That will build your confidence. And practice, practice, practice the questions and also how you present yourself in an interview. So just to stop, just to see if there's any questions you might have. There's none coming through on the chat. Okay, go back to the presentation. Okay, so that's the basics around preparation for interview and also your CV. So what I want to do next is in terms of more preparation, and I'm not going to go into huge detail. This is about just having an awareness of your profession and the context and issues that might be around. It's likely that you will never be asked questions directly about these issues. The point of actually including these is so that you can introduce them into the conversation in terms of demonstrate your awareness about the profession and the context. So just nursing and midwifery, just be aware of the structure of nurse and midwifery within Ireland. Be aware of the role of different organisations. Be aware that the Department of Health includes the Chief Nursing Officer. So that's probably the senior civil servant, I'd imagine, nurse midwife in the country. So that's currently Rachel Kenner. Okay, nobody's going to ask you who it is, but just be aware that the Department of Health's role is to set health strategy. So it's at a policy and strategy level. The strategy in healthcare is sláinte care. The role of the HSE is to deliver on that strategy in terms of the operational side. So within the HSE, the senior nursing function in terms of the operational side and the delivery of service planning, the delivery of service, is the Office of the Nursing and Midwifery Service Director, the ONMS. The senior nurse there, the service director, is Geraldine Shaw. Their role is to support nurses and midwives in terms of fulfilling their functions. So they support training and policy, up until recently, the clinical nurse specialist role. They also manage the nursing and midwifery planning and development units, which are around the country, and also the Centres for Nurse and Midwifery Education as well. NMBI, in the bottom left-hand corner, they're the regulator. Their primary function is to safeguard the public. So their function is not to support nurses and midwives, even though they do that in supporting the public, but is to regulate the profession. So they're all about nursing and midwifery and the public. So they outline things such as the registration requirements, education standards, and then any other standards or requirements such as medication management and so on. The Irish Nurse and Midwives Organisation is a trade union and is also the National Nursing and also the Midwifery Association for Ireland. So they represent nurses and midwives as opposed to nursing and midwifery. So they're a nurses and midwives organisation. So again, just have an awareness that that is the case, and you'll be surprised there is huge confusion. Every year the INMO will receive emails and telephone contacts about their registration, whereas in effect the question is actually for NMBI, and vice versa. There might be questions sent to NMBI around representative issues that are not actually regulator questions. So there is confusion, and we see it all of the time in terms of the INMO. Again, I'm going to keep on emphasising, just have an awareness. You don't need to go through and look in huge detail at the function of any of these bodies. Just be aware of what their role is. In 2016, the NMBI, the Chief Nursing Officer and the HSE developed the values for nursing and midwifery. Now, these were on the back of all of the scandals around Mid Staffordshire, Morecambe Bay in the UK, and various scandals within Ireland. So it was reaffirming what the values are for nursing and midwifery. So this is useful just to know that the values are compassion, care and commitment, and they underpin everything that we do in terms of the professions. So in your conversation, nobody's going to ask you what are the values of nurse and midwifery, but when you're responding, you can say that in terms of your own, if they say what are your own personal values, well, my personal values align with those of nurse and midwifery. About compassion, care and commitment, and it demonstrates your awareness of the broader professional issues. Okay, so that's all. Again, you don't need to know much more than that. There is information on NMBI's website, but just something simple to remember: compassion, care and commitment underpins the whole of our practice. Again, another thing just to be aware of, you don't need to read it, you don't need to go into any detail, is that nursing and midwifery has a statutory footing within the country, in that there is legislation that underpins the role of the nurse and midwife, and it's the 2011 Nurses and Midwives Act. This gives a legal definition to the fact that you can only call yourself a nurse or midwife in Ireland if you are a registered nurse. So other people can't go around calling themselves a nurse unless they've met the requirements through education and then are registered with NMBI. I'm not going to say anything more than that, but everything that comes out, the role of NMBI and the role of the profession in terms of prescribing and so on, is all defined in this legislation. So just be aware there is legislation there. Don't necessarily go and read it. Something you do need to be aware of is, because it underpins your professional practice, the various codes and documents. So key ones you need to have a deeper awareness, because it's expected in terms of your functioning as a professional, is you need to know what the key aspects of the Code of Professional Conduct and Ethics are. You need to, if you're a midwife, you need to know what the practice standards for midwives are as well. And importantly, you need to understand the scope of nurse and midwifery practice framework. Now, this is useful to know this even in terms of answering questions. So if you're asked a question in terms of what you would do in a given situation. If you're not quite sure, what you would do is you'd go back to the scope of practice and go through the framework. And the framework essentially is this a role that should be performed by a nurse? Does your employer want you to perform this function? Are there policies, procedures and processes in place that are to perform the role or function or process in your organization? Do you have the correct knowledge and competency and education? Do you also feel competent to actually carry out that function? So that's your response to any question you're not sure about, is to go back to the scope of practice. If you're unsure, I would refer back to the scope of practice. Okay, just remember those key steps. Again, you don't need to be able to memorize every aspect of the framework, but you do need to know what the steps are in terms of making a decision about your scope of practice. The scope of practice is just outlined in 5 principles, which are relatively straightforward and you should be familiar with. Respecting the dignity of the person, professional responsibility and accountable. And remember, any act or omission that in terms of reflects your practice, you will be held accountable for it. So you'll have to account to somebody if required in terms of how you made a decision you were responsible for, and how you're accountable in terms of what actually you did. There's also trust and confidence in terms of the profession and also from the public. Also the quality of care should underpin your practice, and that you're also required to collaborate with others, both within nursing and midwifery and also across boundaries within the multidisciplinary team or with other agencies as well. And you'll notice in the middle, it states the values. So all of these are underpinned by the values and the code of conduct. And the thing that links them all up is patient safety. Other documents just to be aware of other codes, that there is guidance on social media and social networking, and to be aware that when you're actually outside of work and you're interacting on social media and networking, that you can be held accountable for anything that you post up if it's deemed to be unprofessional or there's a fitness to practice issue arises. There was an issue in the UK during COVID where there was a nurse from Brighton who was leading and still is leading the campaign around saying that COVID doesn't exist, that it's a spamdemic, or I think that's what spamdemic, I think she calls it, and something else, and is saying that it's actually caused by the 5G network. So she was posting that up on social media, in the media generally, and has now been suspended in the UK from the NMC register. So just be aware that what happens outside of work, you can also be responsible for, be held accountable and responsible for. Be aware of the guidance on medication management, which has been updated in August 2020. So just knowing that there is a recent document shows that you're up to date. And there's some other documents there, prescription authority for nurses and midwives, and also record in practice. So in terms of what the requirements are expected in terms of record in practice. I've already mentioned this, just be aware that the document for medication management was updated last year. And it just has a number of elements in there just to be aware of it around delegation and so on. Just some other issues, again, this is just being aware of because it has an impact on the profession. In 2018, the Framework for Safe Nurse Staffing and Skill Mix in General and Specialist Medical and Surgical Settings was published. This outlines and underpins what it is that the Public Health Service has set in terms of safe staffing and skill mix and how it's calculated. It is currently being rolled out in the emergency departments, and in the last couple of weeks the residential and care of the older person settings have now been included. So this original report is med surgical, but it's now being rolled out in all areas. So this defines what is expected in terms of nurse staffing. You just need to be aware there is such a document. Again, nobody will ask you in great detail to outline what's in there, but at least have an awareness that document is being published. And in the same way, the policy on development of graduate to nursing and midwifery practice outlines the career pathway. So this will be of interest to you because it outlines what your career, the way it could unfold and the pathways that are available for you. So this is an excellent document. It shows the pathway from graduate to advanced practice, which theoretically could be between 3 and 5 years from post-registration. I suspect that that would be quite unusual, but it does show and define the process. So just be aware there is a policy. So if somebody's asking you about your career development, at least you're aware what the potential is. One of the key issues that's emerged the last couple of years, particularly during COVID, is telehealth and e-health. There is a strategy from the HSE in terms of introducing technology, digital health into digital health strategy into healthcare in Ireland. The Office of the Nursing and Midwifery Service Director has a digital strategy, and there are working groups set up to actually see what the impact is going to be on nursing and what the requirements for nursing midwifery are. In terms of perhaps telehealth last year came into its own, and we actually seen from May onwards that there was a dramatic expansion as part of Sláinte in terms of using telehealth and e-health within the health service. You don't need to know much more than that. That's just some additional information. I'll skip over that. What I'm going to do now is just stop for a second and see if there's any questions.
There's one question there I can see in the chat.
What's in the chat?
Is there a limit on the amount of past job experiences you put in the CV? Must you include every single one? Okay,
so if you have an extensive CV, usually people put in the last 10 years would be fine. And then beyond that, you can just put in there additional information is available if required. So you can put that sort of caveat in there. In terms of if you're at the beginning of your experience, then it's likely that that shouldn't be an issue. It's likely that you won't have a long CV, and nor will it be expected. And that's an important point, that remember that if you're thinking, oh, I've got nothing to put on my CV, if it's a post that is open to new graduates, then there's no expectation that you will have a detailed CV, because how could you? And the same with your education. You know, you will be expected to have your degree and possibly put in your leaving certificate. And if you have something else, that's fine as well, but there'll be no expectation you have much more than that. Now, as you progress in your career, there will be an increase in expectation that you would have engaged in terms of CPD and also in terms of other professional education activities, such as high diplomas, postgraduate diplomas, certificates, master's degrees, and so on. So that will be expected as you progress on, but probably not at this stage. So okay, and the same thing goes in terms of any aspect to do with continual professional development. People are not necessarily interested in what you were engaged in 10 years ago. They're only really interested in the last 2 or 3 or 4 years. So some people might be engaged in a lot of CPD, and they might only need to put in the last year or 2. So just be aware of that as well. You don't need to put everything in, and you can be selective in terms of what's appropriate for the particular job. Is that all the questions, Catherine?
Yep, that's all out there so far.
All right, lovely. Can you see my screen again?
We can, yeah.
Okay. So just in the broader context, and I'm not going to dwell on this because it's just sort of some general information, is be aware of who the regulators are, particularly in terms of HICWA, what their role is, particularly if you're in an area that is subject to HICWA standards and also site visits. Be aware of HIPRA down at the bottom. This used to be the Medicines Board. It's now called the Health Products Regulatory Authority. So these used to be purely the Medicines Board, which used to certify which medicines could be used within the country. There are also other regulators such as the Data Protection Commissioner, the Ombudsman for Children, Mental Health Commissioner, and the General Ombudsman as well. Key ones there, HICWA and HIPRA. A point I made earlier was being aware of the context in terms of the organisation you're applying for work with. So one of the key things just to be aware of is which hospital group the hospital is in. So if it's within the public sector, which hospital is it? If it's Beaumont Hospital, it's in the RCSI hospitals group. If it's in Silda, it's going to be Galway hospitals, and so on. So Safe and Safe West, Cork, Ireland East, St Vincent's Hospital, or the Mater. Again, you don't need to know anything in detail about the hospital groups, but at least know that which hospital group they're going to be in. It's likely as we move on in the next couple of years, this is going to be reorganised again. So it includes both the community care organisations and the hospital groups. So they're going to be greater linked in together as we move through Sláinte care. So it's just some information. There are 7 hospital groups, and you just need to know which one the organisation is part of, or even whether it's a community health organisation and which community health organisation it's in. Be aware that the health strategy for the country for the 10-year period, we're already about 2 or 3 years into it, is Sláinte care. This is the health strategy, and just by knowing it's the health strategy should be all you need to know, beyond knowing that the emphasis is trying to move the focus of healthcare into primary healthcare prevention and also community-based care. So it's to try to have greater integration between hospital and community services. If you know that, that's all you probably need to know. So it's Sláinte care is seen as the only show in town in terms of strategy. That's how it's usually referred to. Patient safety is an issue that has emerged over the last 20 years, and it's worthwhile dropping patient safety in any response by saying that is a vital component in terms of your practice, ensuring patient safety and being aware of it at all times. So just be aware that patient safety is something that we should all be aware of. General Data Protection 2018, the GDPR regulations came into place. Nurses and midwives are in a privileged position because we have access to personal and sensitive information. Therefore, there's greater onus upon you in terms of being aware of GDPR. So if you haven't completed any awareness training, or your organisation doesn't provide it, you can complete a very short GDPR training program online at inmoprofessional.ie. It takes about 20 to 30 minutes, and it will produce a certificate at the end, which you can include as part of your CPD. Just click on, put in your email address, complete the short course, and then you can put on your CV to say you're aware of what the GDPR requirements are for you as a nurse or midwife. Just something about maintaining your competence, why you need to put CPD information on there. It is part of your code of conduct and underpins professional practice. So you're expected to keep up to date in terms of your knowledge and skills through CPD. And you need to be also prepared to demonstrate that you are competent as well. So if you're asked to account or to demonstrate competence, then you need to be aware that how you're going to do that. I'm not going to say anything about a portfolio. That'll come into its own in the future in terms of just collecting information. If you're looking for information, I'm sure you're already signed up to HSE Land from being students. If you're looking for information to put on your CPD, go back to HSE Land, look at either the nursing and midwifery components or the other elements, and take those courses to build out your CPD. And also just to emphasise, there is information available or resources on INMO Professional that you can view videos and to say that you have viewed them and participated in that professional development. Just to say, recently we had a nursing festival and midwifery festival, so there is very up-to-date information from the last month or so. I'm just going to move on to knowing yourself. Again, I'm just going to briefly mention this because this is important in terms of preparing for your interview. One way of actually preparing is to carry out a psychometric analysis. So you can do this yourself. You can either take a test you can download offline, or you can complete an online test as well. And the idea of the psychometrics is just to help you understand yourself. In corporate sector, they include this as part of the interview process, not within the health system though. So this is for your benefit to help you prepare. So a good one to look at, particularly in response to what are your strengths, is to complete the VIA character strength questionnaire. It's an online questionnaire and tool. It covers 24 characteristics, 7 virtues. So these are all grouped into 7 virtues. And essentially you go to viacharacter.org, you complete the questionnaire, which is free of charge, and it will produce a report. And it will tell you which one of these that your strengths are. So when you ask that question, you can say that actually I've recently completed the VIA character strengths classification measure, and what it found is that actually I'm high on creativity. And then when you go to the test, it'll give you more information about that. And then you can give an example from your practice. All of this can be prepared. Or you can say that actually I score high on kindness, and you can link that to the values and compassion, care and commitment. Or I score high on love of learning or teamwork. So that gives you something to prepare beforehand. It's also an evidence-based tool, and you can link it to an example from your practice. This has been developed because the emphasis over the last 20 years since the development of positive psychology is trying to emphasize what you're good at doing and building your capacity in that area, not focusing on what you're not good at doing. So if you look at, say, your limitations or what you're not good at, you could say that perhaps you're not so good at perspective taking, and because you're aware of that, you actually place greater emphasis on trying to be aware of it and also building your skills around that. So that could be a way you answer that question as well. So this is just one example. This is the VIA classification of character strengths. It is a validated measure that's researched over the last 10 years and is freely available for you to use. And it allows you to prepare something for the interview so that you actually can answer that question about what your strengths are immediately. But remember to also always link them to an example from your practice. If you want more information, there's videos on the VIA Character Strengths website. This just shows you the virtues as well: wisdom, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence, and gives you more detail. So there's loads of information and tools on that site. One of the questions that comes up as well is around team working, because as nurses we work as team members, and we also work with other teams as well, members of the multidisciplinary team. So if you wanted to prepare something in preparation for questions around being a team member, what you can do is you could carry out a test for yourself, or not even do the test. You can just read around this topic area, and probably the one that's most widely used is something called the Belbin team roles. So this shows you have an understanding of the nature of teams and the different roles and functions of team members. So what Belbin has highlighted is that there are 9 different roles in a team. And that's why when you look at sports teams, they're usually around 10 or 12 people in a team, because that's seen as being the natural number in a team. And what Belbin has outlined is there are 3 different groups. There are the thinking roles, there are the action roles, and there are the people-centered roles. So the people type roles are the ones sort of working as a team worker, working for the good of the team, being a coordinator for the team. The thinking roles are having specialist knowledge in a particular area. Perhaps you're excelling in terms of wound management. That's a particular area you've developed expertise in. Or perhaps it's in some other aspect of the team function. It could be somebody who's monitoring what's going on to make sure people are on track. In terms of action, so these are the action people, and it's very characteristic of nurses, is that they're the implementers, the people who get the job done. They don't just talk about it, they don't find information, they get the job done. Or they try to shape the way things are moving forward. Or they're the people, most importantly, who complete the job. Because some people talk and strategize, they monitor, and they give you the benefit of their wisdom, but the job still needs to be implemented and still needs to be finished. So what you can say if you're asked anything about teams and team roles, you can say you're aware of Belvin's team roles and the importance of having these type of roles within any team, and being able to identify where these roles are not being fulfilled, where they need to be developed, or somebody else needs to be brought in. But from you personally, you could say, well, actually, when I look at Belvin's team roles, I'm actually very good at implementing, and I'm very good at finding information as a resource investigator. So they're the strengths that I have. I have strengths in terms of completing and finishing. So if you ask the question around strengths, or you ask the question around teams, that's your answer. And then give an example. An example of where I was an implementer is where I was involved in a project which I was the key person implementing, whatever it was. Okay, again, you can prepare these beforehand. You can also use this as part of looking at your weaknesses. So you could turn around and say, I'm aware that the team roles, I have strengths, these are my strengths, but actually the one that I know I'm not so good at is complete a finisher. So within a team, I need to be aware of who fulfills that function, because that's the way teams work. So again, one of your weaknesses is that you tend not to have specialist knowledge in the area, so you contribute much more as a coordinator and team worker. So this answers the question around strengths and weakness, and also team roles as well. This is prepared beforehand, so you can prepare all of this beforehand. And then just the final one here, an area that is relevant to nursing and midwifery is emotional intelligence, because nurse and midwives are emotional labourers. So that's what we do as part of our job and our function and our profession, is actually manage emotional situations. So an area of interest is emotional intelligence. Now, there's a debate as to whether this is a real thing or not, but it is generally something that is accepted within a human resource perspective. So you could go onto the HSE land, you'll find there is a resource and a test to measure your level of emotional intelligence. It's important because it increases your leadership ability. It is important in terms of engaging with staff and reducing turnover. It's important for working with teams, making decisions, managing stress, and also your personal well-being as well. So go on to HSE land, have a look for the emotional intelligence if that's what you want to focus on. And again, you can say what it is that you're high on in terms of emotional intelligence. What are the things you excel in? So you can answer that question in terms of what are your strengths. And then give an example perhaps from your practice. So I'm not going to say anything more about that. They're interesting tools to help you prepare for the interview and hopefully reduce some of the stress and anxiety. So you know, as soon as that question's asked, I have that prepared. I know what my strengths are, and I can give an example from my practice. I know what my weaknesses are, and I can link them to my role as a team member and turn it to my advantage by saying that actually I know this is where my weakness is, but I'm also aware that there are many functions within a team, and it's important to be aware of those functions. So just to step out again, it's now 10 past before I go on to the final part. Is there any questions? Any questions, Catherine?
There's no one I can see in the chat.
Yeah, anyone want to unmute themselves, ask any questions? Did we say there was an exam at the end, Catherine?
There is one question that's actually popped up in the chat. Is it appropriate to address the interviewer by their first name if told to do so, or should you still refer to them by title and last name?
I refer to them in their title and probably their surname, Mr., Mrs., Professor, Doctor, or whatever it might be. It's much safer. Is that okay? The chances are you probably won't need to refer to them anyway, because you'll be responding to their questions. But if you do need to refer to them, then I'd refer to them based upon their title. Miss, Mrs, Mr, Doctor, Professor.
I'm just wondering, will this recording be available for people who weren't here today to watch, Catherine?
Yeah, so we're holding the session another 2 times. Hopefully, we'll be holding one in April and holding one in May as well. But we're hoping to be able to email this to everyone who registered for today. So you should have gotten a copy of the PowerPoint slides, and we're hoping to be able to send you a copy of the recording as well.
Perfect, thanks so much.
No problem.
Okay, so just to move on to the final component. Catherine, can you see my screen?
I can.
Competency-based interviews?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So this is the method that is used within the health service in terms of managing interviews and making decisions on selection of people attending for interviews. Everything that I've said so far helps build towards performing well in a competency-based interview. So even though it's the last part, everything else will be linked up. So the word competency is widely used in the HSE environment. It refers to skills that are necessary to achieve the effective performance in the job. These are outlined in the job description, which are in the competencies or roles and functions. So the job description is what the interviewers will also be used in terms of developing their questions. They will be the domains that they will ask you questions about. They won't ask you questions outside of those domains unless you introduce things into the conversation yourself. So be mindful, keep it straight and within the context of the interview. What tends to happen is there will be set questions or roughly the same questions that will be asked to each of the participants. If you introduce something then in your response, the interviewer can then ask you in more detail about that information. Just be aware though that the interview, if it lasts 30 or 45 minutes, they can only go so far in terms of going into follow-up questions. So it's likely you'll only get 1 follow-up question, 2 at the very most. And the more they ask, the less opportunity will be for the other members on the panel to ask you questions or to go into detail. So just be aware of that. So I'm underlining that every job has a set of key competencies which are outlined in the job description. That's the basis of the competency interview. These are the type of examples. In a broad sense, they might be your communication skills, might be around what the questions revolve or are likely to link to. So what they're interested in is that you know something about communication and you can apply it to your experience. Or it might be that you led out on something. And remember, leadership skills are interpreted by the HSE as something that everybody should have, not just people in senior positions. A change you might have been involved in. This can be a small change, but remember, change is constant and is all around us. So there should be examples that you've seen or even partially been involved in a change process. Might be planning approaches to care. I mean, this is particularly important because the nursing process requires us to assess, plan, implement and evaluate. So whenever you're being asked a question around change or even planning care, you have to refer back to assessing, understanding what's happening in a situation, whether that's to do with patients or whether it's to do with a change that's occurring. Make a plan of what you're actually going to be doing about caring for somebody individually or making a change. Then you're going to need to implement that change or implement the care for a patient. And then you're going to need to actually go back and check whether you've actually achieved anything. So you're going to have to evaluate. So that's a simple tool that you're familiar with. All of you should be familiar with the nursing process. Assess, plan, implement and evaluate. That can be adapted in terms of answering questions, or even if you don't use the words, have that as a framework in your own mind. So those frameworks are sometimes useful if you're not sure how to structure a response. Another response might be, or another structure could be, what was the problem? What was the solution? What was the action? Problem, solution, action. Or it could be, and these are just tools that you could use. It could be Borden's reflection cycle, which some of you have probably come across, which is what happened? What? So what? What difference did it make? Or what relevance is it? Now what? What are we going to do? Or what did we learn from the situation? So they're just useful tools to keep in your head, and you're thinking, right, how do I structure an answer? Have I said what has happened? What difference did it make? And what do we do next? Or what did I do next? Or what did I learn? They're simple tools. It might be how you've managed staff. That probably might not be as relevant unless it relates to healthcare assistance. Monitoring performance, again, might not be as relevant. So they're the type of domains that they're likely to ask you questions in. So one of the things I've been emphasizing during this session is that competency-based interview questions relates to providing examples. So competency-based interview questions are used in an effort to make the interview process standardized. So you're being asked the same type of question and make it as fair as possible. So they're not just random questions that are being asked by the interviewer. They might be questions that just come into their head, or it might even be personal questions they're asking. It's to avoid all of those components. There will be a person from the Human Resource Department sitting in on the interview. They won't usually ask questions. They are monitoring the process and providing advice to the interviewers. So competency-based interviews, a technique which is being used increasingly. It is used throughout the HSE, and it's used for all types of positions as well. So in terms of what it looks like, in generally a competencies-based interview is one which the interviewers focus on behaviours, so it's behaviourally related. So again, all that means is they're looking for examples from your practice. What were your behaviours that demonstrated that a particular competence? They're not looking for you just to tell them the theory about it. It's always about what the behaviours were. They focus on how the candidate has demonstrated the skills in the past. So again, these are the stories. So have them prepared, being able to adapt them in the interview. So have a number of different stories, a number of different examples, and then be able to adapt them to the question. So a panel in a competency-based interview is between 2 and 5 interviewers, but can be as many as 13. It's to your advantage if it's more than 5, as I've mentioned earlier. Try to identify what the roles are. Who's the human resource person? Who's the chairperson? And sometimes they might even say what it is they're going to be focusing on as part of the competencies. Each individual member of the panel will be allocated a different competency, possibly 2, but they will at least focus on one of them. It's unlikely they will stray across different competencies. Respond to the interviewer through eye contact and also include the others as well. Sometimes it involves a presentation, probably not at the level that you're coming into at the moment in terms of a staff nurse post for a new graduate. It's probably unlikely to be a presentation until you move up in terms of your career progression. So probably one of the key things is around tricky questions. And again, this is repetitive because it has to be, because it's to underline what is the most important aspect of competency-based interviews. So behavioural questions, they're looking for information about the details of a specific situation or event that occurred. So it might be a patient care experience, it might be a challenging situation, it might be a learning experience. An interest, and I suppose what they're most interested in is what your specific actions were and what your behaviours were and what the outcomes of what happened. And the outcomes don't need to be positive. They can be a learning outcome as well. What they're not looking for is your opinion. They're not looking for any theory. They're not looking for what you think. They're looking for what actually happened. They're not looking just for an assessment of your own strengths and weaknesses. So this is slightly different. When they ask you the question, what is your strengths and weakness? That's a specific question they're asking. But within the behavioural component, they're not necessarily just asking for your strengths. They're looking for your actions and behaviour and what actually happened. So why use this approach? It's seeking information from the past. So it's information that has unfolded. It reduces any misunderstandings about the past because you can clarify them. It reduces your effort to make a good impression. It reduces the hypothetical element, prevents personal impression management, provides actual examples of your knowledge, skills and attributes, and promotes consistency between interviews as well and interviewees. So again, I've mentioned a number of techniques that you can use, whether it's solution, problem, action, or whether it's what, so what, now what. Or it could be assess, plan, implement, and evaluate. Another technique is called the STAR technique. And one thing just to highlight, these are just tools to help you. There's nothing absolute about them. They're purely just tools to help you structure a response in terms of an interview or another context as well. So the STAR technique is just a process to follow. It's not so different from a change process or the nursing process. So when you ask the question, the first thing is just to stop. Listen. So you need to listen to the question and then think of an event. Pull out one of the examples that you have developed or prepared. If you're not sure what the question is, ask them to repeat or to ask in a different way. Then once you've prepared, the first thing you need to do is describe a situation. So it might be that you worked on a medical ward. And then the task, it might be that there was an issue. So the situation is you worked on a medical ward and the task and the issue was around drug errors. So you wanted to try to reduce drug errors. So the task is, what you decided to do was introduce red tabards. So that when somebody is wearing a tabard, they're not to be asked questions or disturbed in terms of the medicine administration round or process. So the action you took to complete. So we introduced the red tabards. It was introduced over a 2-week period. We monitored the number of errors that were being made, and the result was that we actually reduced errors. So actually, when we reflected on it, we found that this was a good approach and we were going to introduce it across the whole of the ward. So that's a STAR technique. So it just gives you a structure in terms of how you answer or respond to any questions you might have. So just think of that in your own mind. Situation, what was the context and situation? What was the task that you had to complete? What did you actually do? What were the actions? And what actually result was it? And again, just to emphasize, the result doesn't have to be positive. If it comes to the fact that you find that it was a complete failure, then you need to be asking yourself, why didn't it work? And what did we learn? And what would we do next time? Okay, that's a sign of a thinking professional. So in terms of the STAR responses, to recap, make sure you focus on what you did. So use the word I a lot, not what we did. This is what I did in the situation, because it's your interview and it's supposed to be your behaviour demonstrated. Describe the results of the event. Make sure that's important. That's the evaluation component in the nursing process. Although it's always good to use a successful example, you can use an example where you failed. Emphasize learning. Learning is the most important thing. You can also link it to a reflective cycle, whether that's something like Gibbs. So you can just say, afterwards, we reflected on the process, or I reflected on the processes, and this is what I did. So you can use something like Gibbs, or you can use Borden, what, so what, now what, and that's more than adequate. Okay, and I'm just going to finish up. This is just the type of marking grid they have. The marking grid is just what they're recording. So it's likely each of the people who are on the interview panel will be given 1 or 2 competencies to cover. They will have a scoring. They will have a scoring system. This one is out of 100. Each of the competencies will be weighted. In this case, they're all weighted evenly, 25, 25, and so on. Sometimes they might not be weighted evenly. There might be one that is actually given more weighting. Each individual member of the interview panel will record, and then they will discuss which person has the highest score and why they have the highest score. What I would say is that if you are unsuccessful in an interview, it is vitally important that you go back to the chairperson or the human resource department to obtain this information and to gain feedback as well. Because it's only by obtaining the information and the feedback that you can actually learn and prepare for the next interview. So you should see it as a learning experience. This is the type of information you should receive. Sometimes they will put some information in text form underneath as well, but that will be quite limited. So it's important you go back to get feedback from the chairperson or from the human resource department. I just put in some behavioural interview questions, the type of thing, but you can imagine what they are. Give me an example. Talk about a situation. Tell me about a situation that you did so on. How did you build your confidence? Give me an example of how you failed. They're the type of things they're going to be asking. So you'll know straight away, as soon as those type of questions are asked, that's a behavioural question. I need to give an example and I need to link it in terms of what I actually learned from the situation as well. I'm going to stop at that point, see if there's any other questions before handing over to Catherine. Catherine, is there any other questions?
Yeah, there's just two in the chat at the moment. The first is, as a newly qualified nurse, who will be put in as references if you've been working with an agency?
You can put anybody that's reflective of, in terms of who can talk about you professionally. So you could put in the university. I suspect that could be somebody who will put in the program director from the university, the program chair. You could even put in terms of your intern experience. It might be that one of the managers might be willing to give you a reference. If you work for an agency, then ask the agency directly for the reference. And remember, the reference is just to reassure the organisation that you're somebody that can be trusted and that there is no negative aspects they need to be looking into. That's all that's in a reference. The other thing to bear in mind with references, they tend not to put anything negative about you, because if they make any reflections that could be deemed as a subjective or personal inference, then they could be open to a legal challenge. So most organisations give factual information and keep purely to the facts. Where you're employed, when you're employed, whether you fulfilled your duties, and whether there was any issues around attendance, for example.
Great. And the last question in the chat then is, would you focus on team roles and emotional intelligence, or just focus on one?
You could focus on one, but it might be worth just to mix it up a little bit and just be aware of your emotional intelligence score as well. So that gives you more ammunition and that gives you more resources you can draw upon in the interview. So you can cover both team aspects and you can cover emotional intelligence. So my preference would be I'd cover both of them, or I would cover the character strengths and teams, whichever way best suits you. More resources you can draw upon.
Great. And actually, there's just one last question after popping into the chat there. When answering questions in an interview, is it best to keep language simple?
I would keep language simple. I would try and keep it concise and to the point. And if the person who is interviewing you, asking you the questions, any follow-up questions, they will ask you for more clarification. So there's no need to be going into huge detail that's going to take 5 or 10 minutes up of the interview. You need to just directly answer the question. And if you wanted to, you could say, I can provide more details if you would like. And just to say that some people do go on a lot in interviews in terms of not being aware of their management time. That also gives an indication to the interview panel in terms of time management and whether you can actually take information, be concise about it, deliver the information, and then wait for the response. I've been in an interview where somebody was asked to do a presentation for 10 minutes. The interview was for 45 minutes and they took 45 minutes to do the presentation. So that's going to tell you straight away this person cannot manage their time in terms of delivering a presentation, particularly if it's a job where they're a teacher.
Brilliant. Okay, I think that's all the questions in the chat for now, Steve. So thanks a million for your presentation, and I hope that you did find it helpful as interns. If you wouldn't mind maybe just hanging around for 1 or 2 more minutes, I just want to go over pay scales with you, because obviously, you know, the point of doing interviews is that you get, you know, a post as a new graduate, and I think it's really important that you do, you know, understand your pay scales. There's maybe just 1 or 2 more questions in the chat, Steve. I don't know if you want to take them now, or maybe if you might be able to type responses into the chat bar.
Yeah, I think is there one in there?
Yeah, just see here.
Oh, some examples you could ask the interviewer. It's entirely up to you. I would shy away from interrogating the interviewer. There's no need to sort of ask them questions that might put them on the spot. They're also on a time. They have a set time which they don't really want to consume in terms of loads of questions. They need to move from one interview to the next. If you want to show that interest in the job, you can ask the question in terms of an opportunity to familiarize yourself with the ward, come and do a visit, or you can ask a question in terms of when you will know about the response in terms of the decision of the interview panel. That's an interesting one to look at as well. You could even ask whether there's any opportunities for role development or career development as well. But I'd keep it to 1 or 2 questions maximum, and definitely don't give the impression you're interviewing the interviewers, because they will automatically think I'm not the one that's been interviewed. Okay,
great. And the one last question there then in the chat is, how long are interviews roughly?
30 minutes, 45 minutes at a maximum, 30 minutes usually. So there's only so much they can ask you anyway. So just be aware of that when you're preparing. Okay,
great. Thanks very much, Steve. So I'm just going to share my screen here with you just so we can go over the pay scales. I'm just going to do kind of a quick fly through for you because in fairness it's a fair bit of information overload for you otherwise. But really I just think it's so important, especially now at the time of year that we're at the time where, you know, 16 weeks have passed since the previous interns from last year's group have finished their internship, and they've been working, and they're having, some of them in some areas are having difficulty moving up the pay scale correctly. So it is important, you know, that you do have an understanding of how you should be moving up the pay scale as your internship goes on, especially towards the end of the summer, you know, just before you graduate. I will be holding more information sessions on you know, your pay scale and how you should be progressing as a new graduate. So don't worry if you're not taking everything on board today. This is really just to kind of plant the seed, and the more you hear it, the more it'll make sense. But basically, when you get your NMBI PIN, you're going to move on to the first point of the pay scale, which is just over €30,600. So talking about incremental credit, what that means basically is normally for every year of work that you do, you'd move up 1 point on the pay scale. But the INMO had fought previously to get the 36 week of internship recognised as incremental credit. So that meant then before the strike, instead of having to wait a full year after you qualified to move on to point 2 of the pay scale, you would have progressed to point 2 after just 16 weeks of work, and that includes time worked as a pre-reg. So that's €32,499. So you can see on the left-hand side of the column there how you would have progressed through the salary scale before the strike, but as part of the settlement now this has changed. So now after 16 weeks of work, you get to skip point 2 and move directly to point 3, which is €33,388. So after 16 weeks, really what that means is you're making almost £1,000 extra than you would have been otherwise. 1 year later, then you'll move on to point 4 of the pay scale, and that then allows you to sign the new enhanced practice contract and switch over to the enhanced practice pay scale. So after a year and 16 weeks of work, you'll be earning €37,161 if you sign the enhanced practice contract that was negotiated as part of the settlement. And you can see on the right hand side there, you know, it does accumulate over time. So if you do sign the contract, you'll earn much more, you know, over the course of your career than you would have otherwise. So after 10 years, you'll have earned an extra over €37,000. It's a huge amount of money that's on the table there for you, just to be aware of it. The enhanced practice contract, the only difference between, you know, a nurse and midwife and an enhanced practice nurse and midwife is that the enhanced practice nurse and midwife has signed this contract and they now have access to a new higher rate of pay. So it's a different salary scale. So there's no change, you know, in the terms and conditions of employment. There's no, you know, negative effects for your pension. If anything, it'll benefit your pension because your base rate of pay will be higher. That means your premium rate of pay will be higher. If you're earning more over the course of your career, if you're paying more into your pension as time goes on. It's just to be mindful, it is something that you have to opt in to do. So once you reach point 4 of the pay scale, you just need to contact HR, let them know that you want to sign the enhanced practice contract, and that'll get the ball rolling for you then. There is also a location allowance of €2,347 for staff working in eligible areas. So this allowance was increased by 20% as part of the strike settlement, and it's also been extended to areas that wouldn't have qualified for it before. So now if you're a nurse working in a medical or a surgical ward, or if you're a midwife working in maternity departments that wouldn't previously have qualified for it, you can now be eligible for the location allowance. The Information Office in the INMO have put a list of eligible areas that qualify for the location allowance on the INMO website. So if you're curious about, you know, when I'm qualifying, I'd like to work in this particular ward, does that qualify? Just go online and it's quite likely, you know, that you'll see if your area is listed there or not. my main takeaway really in relation to pay is keep an eye on your pay slips. You know, in an ideal world, you should be moving up the salary scale correctly, but sometimes that isn't the case, and you might remain on the same increment for longer than you're supposed to. So it is your responsibility, you know, to keep track of your rate of pay. If you notice that you aren't progressing up the salary scale correctly, get in touch either with myself or the information office or the union official for your area, and we can give you advice on how, you know, to seek the correct level of pay. And if that's unsuccessful, then we can engage with your workplace on your behalf and represent you. Just a reminder as well, your INMO student membership is going to expire at the end of your internship. So you will be falling off membership. So it's not something that you would have had to think about really in terms of renewing student membership year on year. But as you're going to transition into new graduates, it is something to bear in mind, because unfortunately we can't represent you in the workplace or at a fitness to practice hearing unless you're a member at the time of the incident. I suppose, just speaking from personal experience, like I think the first 6 months when you're a new graduate is probably the time where you're most likely to make, you know, a mistake, and that you might need advice and support if that happens. You know, you can kind of think of it like car insurance. You know, you can't crash the car and then go to the insurer afterwards and say, I'd like to take out a policy. And the last thing that I want to be is in a position, you know, 9 or 10 months from now down the line, before I get a phone call saying, Catherine, I made a mistake, I need some help. And I'd say, I'm really sorry, you're actually not a member. You used to be when you're a student, but you're not anymore. So really, I'm not trying to scare you, but I just think it's to be mindful, you know, of this. And I do think it is within your interest to have representation from someone. So I suppose it's not all about, you know, workplace issues or industrial relation issues as well. There are other benefits of being a member of the union. Like you have access to courses online. Well, they're online now because of COVID, but a lot of times when COVID isn't here, you know, we'll be able to go back to having physical workshops as well. But stuff done by the Professional Development Centre, you know, they're advertised in the WIN magazine that gets sent out to members each month. There's the library as well. You know, if you do want to do some sort of postgraduate studies, you know, and you want assistance in terms of referencing or things like that, they are another resource that's there for you. We have an information office. They offer a same-day response service for queries over phone or by email on weekdays. They're a really good resource to keep in the back of your mind, you know, and they have an awful lot of information on their webpage as well, on the INMO website. Members also have access to a 24-hour legal advice helpline and a 24-hour counselling helpline as well. So if you're interested in that, there's more information again available on the website. And all full INMO members also have access to Core Markets reward schemes. So they're financial brokers. They offer, you know, a variety of discounts on things like car insurance or health insurance. And again, you know, there's more information there if you want to learn more about it. If you do want to stay within membership once you finish your internship, there's a few ways that you can do it. Normally, you know, you could sign up online, or you can download a form, post it into the membership department, and you can pay annually or you can pay monthly. So annual membership is €299 per year. If you wanted to pay, you know, monthly or every fortnight, if you want to pay via your pay slip, it breaks down to €24.92 if you're paid per calendar month, or €11.50 if you're paid fortnightly. So normally when someone signs up for membership, they start paying fees straight away. But if you're a current student intern member and you kind of sign up in the way that I'm going to show you now, we can arrange to extend your free undergraduate student membership for the duration of your pre-reg period. So normally if I was, you know, there in person with you, I'd be able to hand out forms to you, but we have a new form online and I'll show you now how to access that. If you pre-sign up, you know, for membership as well using that form, it means then that you can get a voucher for a course with the PGC. So like on interview techniques, like the wound care management or other courses that are available on the website. So the form is available on the student and new graduate page of the website. So if you go into inmo.ie, it's under the education tab. Hopefully it's not your first time, you know, looking at this page, but it's there highlighted as 2021 intern members. So the form looks something like this. It's just really important that you download the form before you complete it, because if you complete it online and then download it, for whatever reason, it just downloads the blank version. We've tried to look at it, but it's just the way that it is. So once you've downloaded and completed the form, it should look something like this. It's just really important that you fill in all the details, because otherwise the membership department won't be able to process the form. So make sure, you know, you have your name, up-to-date contact details, especially for email, because if there are any issues, you know, email is how the membership department typically contact people. Your INMO student membership number would be on the card that was given to you when you first joined. It's also in the emails that you receive from the INMO. So the likes of the members updates, you know, that tend to be sent on Fridays by the General Secretary, Philny Hay, tends to be up in the top left corner. For work location, if you don't know where you're going to be working yet, you can put down unknown location and select bank deduction. It's up to you whether you prefer bank deduction or payroll deduction. So payroll deduction just means the fee is automatically taken from your pay slip. It's just handy because it means you don't really have to think about it, the way that I would have paid my fees when I was a member. Bank deduction means the fee is taken from your bank account via standing order. So it's just important to remember, if you're moving work locations and you're paying your fees by payroll deduction, you just need to let the membership department know, because otherwise they won't know that your payroll department has changed. They'll see the fees aren't coming in and they might, assume that you're cancelling your membership. On the form, you also have the option of being informed about what benefits Cornmark can offer you. So if you're ticking yes to that, it doesn't mean that you're automatically subscribing, to any of their reward schemes. It just means you'll get an email letting you know kind of what the offers are that you can avail of. Once you've completed the form, you just need to save it, email it to the membership department, their email address on the bottom of the form there. If you're children's and general students, just put in your email to the membership department that you are, a CNG student, because otherwise they might process you along with, the general or the ID or midwifery students. So it'll just be done that bit earlier, and obviously that's not ideal for you. So once they get your form, they will then post you out a payment deduction form with a self-addressed envelope to return to them, because basically what it means is they just need a physical signature from you, but you don't have to go out and buy a stamp. They'll also post you out a form for the Recruit a Friend initiative. So it's an initiative that runs year round. I think it's great to keep in the back of your mind. Basically what it means is, if a full member of the INMO, so say Joe Bloggs, recommends a non-full member of the INMO, say Mary, joins, and she does, if Mary's filling out the form and she puts down Joe's name, it means Joe gets a €20 one for all voucher. So again, it's something, that's run year round, really good to just have in the back of your mind, that when you are, qualifying, this is something that you can avail of. So that form is on the INMO website at the moment. It's not going to be there, for the duration of the whole year. It is something that the intention is, while you're, still a student member, that you can avail of this form, because it'll then be an extension of your student membership to cover you for your pre-reg period. So if anyone has any, thank you, I suppose, first of all, for coming to the course today, and I hope that you did find it useful. If anyone has any questions, I'm very happy to take them now, and those are my contact details there if anyone needs them. So if you want to unmute yourselves or ask any questions there. Let's see in the chat. So ID nurses pay scale, so that it's the same pay scale that I showed on the screen there. As well, if anyone wants to see, the pay scales in general, if you go onto the INMO website, under the information website or the information webpage, they have the full list of all the different types of nurse midwifery pay scales there. So again, there's more information on the pay scales on the website. Yeah, my contact details. Do you know what? I'll put my email address in the chat box. That might be easier, because then you can copy paste it. Okay. Okay, very big there. Great. Listen, thanks very much for coming on, everyone. I really hope you found that useful, and best of luck with your upcoming interviews. I'm sure you'll do a great job.
Thanks very much, Catherine and Steve.